open up this little starting page. I'm just gonna click out of this. We don't need to have this up here. And I'm gonna go over here and we're just gonna click File, and I'm gonna click New Project. So we wanna start a new project, and this is basically going to allow us to write our applications. So over here inside of Visual C#, you can just click here and you'll see over here there's an option for console app. This is what we want. So don't get too intimidated by all this different stuff. Like I said before, Visual Studio is a very powerful program and it can do a lot of stuff. But make sure you just click console app and we should be good. So I'm just gonna click OK. And actually down here we could give this a name. So I'm just gonna call this draft, and then we could store it wherever we wanted to store it. So when this loads up, you'll see that we now have this file open, and this is just called program.cs, and that .cs extension stands for C#. And then down here we have a basic program. So this is essentially a very simple program, and it's sort of like the template for a program. And don't worry too much about what all this stuff is. In the next video, I'm going to talk you guys through what all this stuff is, what it means, and we'll actually write our first program. But for now, we have everything set up, so we're ready to go and ready to get started with C# development. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you guys how to write your first C# program. We're also just going to talk in general about what a program is. So we're going to look at the different instructions that we can give to the computer and how those instructions are going to play out and allow us to write applications. So over here, we basically just have our basic project set up, and I kind of went over how to do this in the last tutorial. And we're basically given this little text file, and this is a C# file. So it's called program.cs, and that CS extension stands for C#. You'll also notice over here in our Solution Explorer, we have a bunch of different stuff here. So I called my project draft, and then over here I have like this little properties thing, this references thing. Really all we need to worry about over here, and I know there's a lot of stuff over here, is this guy right here, program.cs. That is the C# file that we're going to be programming in. That's the file we're going to be using for this course. And this is really all you need to worry about over here. And you'll see that this is actually populated with some code, with some text by default. You'll see up here we have all of these little commands. It just says using system.collections, all this stuff. Essentially what this is doing is it's just configuring the file, so you don't really have to worry too much about what this stuff is up here. Just make sure that you leave it alone, don't touch it. But basically there's some things that we're gonna have to use with C#, and up here we can specify that we want to use them. So there's these things called system, and there's all these different things that we can use inside of there. But for the most part, you can just kind of leave this alone for now. We'll talk more about what this is later in the course, but for now you don't have to worry about it too much. Down here you'll see this says Namespace Draft. You'll notice that this is actually the same name as the project that we're using. And essentially that's what this is saying. It's saying that we're in the draft project. And actually this is doing some more stuff. Again, we're going to talk more about namespaces later in the course, so you don't really have to worry about that too much. And really, all the stuff up here you can kind of just leave alone. You don't have to worry about that in the beginning. And down here we have these two curly brackets. And these two curly brackets essentially just signify that our program is starting. So inside of these curly brackets, we can actually write some code and the computer will be able to execute that code. Here we have this keyword class, and it's called program. Now a class is essentially just a container where we can store a bunch of code. So inside of a class, we can write all of the code for our program and it'll be able to be executed. So again, we're going to talk more about classes as we go on through this course, but for now, just know that a class is essentially just a container where we can put code. Down here, we have this line of code here. It says static void main. And this is actually what's called a method or a function. Again, we're going to talk more about methods and functions later in the course, but this is sort of just like another container where we can put code. And this is a very important container because this container is where we can put all the code that we want our program to execute. So this main method or this main function, any code that we put inside of here, in other words, any code that we put inside of these open and closed curly brackets is actually going to get executed by our computer. So whatever code I want my program to have, I need to put it inside of this main method. So inside of these open and closed curly brackets. Now, I understand that like a lot of this stuff doesn't make sense right now, and to be perfectly honest with you, we kind of have to just set our program up this way in order for it to work. It doesn't matter if this stuff doesn't make sense. Like obviously you're not going to understand what all this stuff is, but just know that that's totally fine. Like as a beginner, you're not expected to know any of that. You're not going to know any of that. Through this course though, I'm going to be teaching you guys all of this stuff. So by the end of the course, we'll understand what all this stuff is doing, why it's important, why it's there. But for now, I just need you to trust me that we need to have everything set up like this in order for our programs to run. And any code that we're going to write inside of our C# file that we want to execute, I want to put in between these two curly brackets inside of this main block. Okay. So now that we've kind of talked about the structure a little bit, we've talked about, some of the stuff that we needed to know, what I want to do is actually write our first line of code. So we're going to go ahead and write a line of code which is going to print something out onto the screen. So one of the things that is really useful to do when we're writing a program is to print out information. And the most basic instruction that we can give the computer is basically telling it to print something out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Down here, we're going to write our first line of code. So I'm just going to say console with a capital C dot write line. And then I'm going to make an open and closed parentheses, and I'm going to make a semicolon. Now, inside of these open and closed parentheses, I'm going to make an open and closed quotation mark, and I'm just going to type out hello world. So essentially what we're doing here is we're telling C# that we want to write this text out onto the screen. So let's kind of look through this line of code. I'm saying console.writeLine, and this is an instruction. So essentially I'm telling C# that I want to write a line out onto the console. And as you'll see in a second, the console is basically just a little window where we can see the output of our program. I'm saying console.writeLine, and inside of these parentheses, I'm specifying what I want to write out onto the console or out onto the screen. And I'm basically just saying hello world, and then over here I'm putting this semicolon. Now, whenever we're writing a line of code in C#, whenever you're done writing that line of code, you always need to end it with a semicolon. So for the most part, whenever you write an instruction, whenever you write a line of code, you're going to end it with a semicolon, and that's very important. And as a beginner, you're going to forget to put the semicolon. Trust me, everybody does, but eventually you'll just kind of get used to putting it in there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save this file, and now we're going to actually execute this program. So when I say execute the program, essentially what I'm doing is I'm telling the computer to go through and carry out all of the instructions that we specify. In our program right now, we only really have one instruction, which is telling the computer to write a line out onto the console. I'm going to come up here and you'll see there's this start button. So this is going to be our best friend throughout the course. Anytime I want to run my program, I'm going to go ahead and click this start button. So I'm just going to click it. And when I click this start button, my program is actually going to run. And if you look there, you'll see that a black window popped up for just a second. I'm continuing to run it. Essentially what's happening is C# is printing out the line hello world onto a little console window that's popping up. But the problem is that our program is printing that out and then the program is terminating, so that window is going away. In order to keep that window up so we can see what's going on, I'm going to type out another line of code. I'm just going to type console.readline. And basically what this line of code is going to do is it's going to keep that little console window up until I enter in a line of text. So now when I run my program, you guys will see that this little black window up here appears and then it stays open. So before it was kind of flashing up and then disappearing, but now it's going to stay open. And you'll see we're printing out hello world onto the screen. Now, if I click the enter key, so I'm just going to click enter, this window is going to go away. So anytime I click enter, that basically tells our program that we're done executing it, so we want it to go away. And that's basically all we have to do. So I can write out instructions in here. I can write out lines of code. I can press the start button, and then I'm basically executing all of those lines of code. And then obviously to get out of this, like I said, you can just like type a space and type enter, or you can really type anything and just hit enter, and then the program will terminate. This is sort of our first C# instruction. And like I said, console.writeLine basically just writes a line of text out onto the screen. And then we can include this console.readLine instruction in order to keep that window up so we can see what we're printing out. Now that we know how to print out something onto the screen,